Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, literature, TV, popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the show. My name is Bruce Markison. Usually I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria, but Tracy is going to be off mic and off camera. She's preparing for a house move coming up, so it will be me and our guest coming up. And we're really looking forward to this one because this guest has just been bestowed a terrific honor. Today, we're going to have someone who's been a regular guest on this program. He's been on at least 4 or 5 times, and that is Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, author, historian, expert on the films and television shows of Dan Curtis, a general authority as well on horror and movies and TV. And on May 10th of this year, Jeff was named to the Rondo Awards Monster Kid Hall of Fame. He is part of a Hall of Fame class that includes some other notables: actor Daniel Roebuck, publisher Ben Omart of Bear Manor Media, also inventor Lawrence Liff, artist and writer tandem Lisa and Chris Herzog, and the late horror historian Terry Pace. So let's welcome Hall of Famer Jeff Thompson. Jeff, how you doing?
Hi, Bruce and Tracy. Thank you so much for inviting me to come back, and thank you for your congratulations. I am overjoyed, thrilled to be inducted into the Monster Kid Hall of Fame by the Rondo Awards and the Classic Horror Film Board.
Yeah, this is the first time we get to call you Hall of Famer Jeff Thompson. It has a nice ring to it. So I'm curious, Jeff, did you have any idea that this might happen, or did this come as a complete surprise to you?
No, I wanted it to happen. I visualized and manifested it, perhaps. The other categories in the Rondo Awards, and sometime look at rondoaward.com, are feature nominees, and you have to vote for one of those, or you can write in a vote. But for awards such as Writer of the Year, Sam Irvin, and Artist of the Year, Fan Artist of the Year, Monster Kid of the Year, Monster Kid Hall of Fame, there are no choices. You just have to write in someone's name. I have been nominated for a Rondo Award a couple of times for my books about producer-director Dan Curtis and other things. But this year I was nominated in category number 6, Blu-ray Extras, because remember, I do on-camera introductions to 11 Dan Curtis productions that were released recently by Kino Lorber Blu-ray and DVD Company. So that was nice to be nominated. But if you look at my Facebook page, you'll see that for quite a while, almost every day, I told people about the Rondo Awards and explained what they are and explained what a monster kid is, someone who grew up loving sci-fi horror monsters and made it his or her life's work in some way, and asked people to vote for me. 3,100 people voted this year for the Rondo Awards, more than any year, I believe. And I was just overjoyed to be one of the inductees into the Hall of Fame. So about a week ago, Saturday, May 30th, the Rondo Awards ceremony was held at Wonderfest, a terrific convention in Louisville, Kentucky. The head of the Rondo Award, the heads of the Rondo Awards are Eileen and David Colton, along with Linda Wiley and Rocco Jerome and others. David Colton spent decades writing for USA Today. He wrote Ray Bradbury's obituary and many other obituaries and notable articles. Now, for the last 24 or 25 years, he's been doing these Rondo Awards, which present the year's best in everything that we fans care about: movies, TV, books, fiction and nonfiction, magazines, artwork, podcasts, live events, um, just everything you can possibly imagine. So I was delighted to win this Rondo Award, and I'm so glad that I went to the award ceremony at Wonderfest. Wonderfest is a huge convention that began as a model making convention, and that's still what its roots are. But now it has expanded to all sorts of popular culture and fanish delights. But it was just enormous. It covered an entire hotel. I had to park 2 hotels away and walk because there were so many
Wow.
cars. But there were 2 huge ballrooms that were dealers' rooms, and then countless smaller rooms where people were building models or exhibiting intricate, elaborate, beautiful models, and some Q&As going on. Victoria Price, daughter of Vincent Price, was there, and
Hmm.
Marta Kristen of Lost in Space, as well as quite a few Lost in Space props and set pieces, and Beverly Washburn, who was one of the stars of the cult classic Spider Baby,
Yep.
which my friend Larry Underwood, known as Dr. Gangrene, Nashville's horror host, um, presented at Wonderfest. Every year, Dr. Gangrene is a guest there, and he does a live show, very much like what he does here in Nashville every 3 or 4 months. And so this year he showed Spider Baby, and Beverly Washburn sat and watched the whole movie and then talked with him on stage afterwards. So there's always a lot going on, and those dealers' rooms were just out of this world.
Yeah.
And so the Rondo Award ceremony is part of the festivities every year. It's held at Wonderfest. And I'm so glad that I went because um, not many of the winners were able to come in person because some of the winners live in England, California, Illinois, many other far off places. But most of the winners sent a little thank you video if they were not able to attend. But the people who were there, the winners who were present, were Sam Irvin, who won his 8th Rondo Award for Writer of the Year this year, and Mark Maddox, the fantastic artist. You've seen his artwork on everything: Lunchboxes, the Dark Shadows
Oh, yeah.
Lunchbox, and covers, book covers by Anthony Taylor and so many other writers, and posters and all sorts of things, magazine covers. So Mark Maddox was there, and Anita Pace, who is the widow of Terry Pace, was there, and she and the late Terry and their 2 grown children all were inducted into the Monster Kid Hall of Fame because they are perhaps Alabama's first family of horror and
Hmm.
fandom. Terry Pace
Hmm.
taught at the University of Northern Alabama for many years, and then suffered a stroke, which inhibited his movement. But he continued on with his wonderful bright spirit and his great intelligence, and um, finally he passed away last February, I believe. That was very, very sad, and so it was very important, very essential for the voters to induct Terry Pace and Anita and their children into the Monster Kid Hall of Fame this year. So those were the 4 winners who were there, she and I, as well as Sam and Mark. And then other winners such as filmmaker Ansel Farage and horror host Sven Gulli and many others sent thank you videos. So it was a very nice event, about an hour and a half. And so I was delighted that I went. It's about a 2 hour and 45-minute or so drive from Nashville up to Louisville, Kentucky. But it was certainly worth driving up there to walk through the dealers' rooms and see some old friends and to attend the Rondo Awards and to receive my plaque featuring a bust of the character actor Rondo Hatton, who appeared in several horror movies in the 1940s. That's what that is whom the Rondo Awards is named after, are named after. So it was a great time, and I am already looking forward to next year's Wonderfest and next year's Rondo Awards. I'm hoping that Kino Lorber will put out even more Dan Curtis productions um, in the future, and I hope that I can give on-camera introductions to those as well. I may have told you back in April of 2025, Brett Wood from Kino Lorber and a Nashville-based cameraman came here to my House of Dark Shadows in Nashville and set up a camera and turned it on, and I talked for 3.5 hours. Um, Brett said, "Okay, now let's talk about the Jack Palance, Richard Matheson, Dan Curtis Dracula," and so we did. And now let's talk about Dead of Night, and now let's talk about Frankenstein or The Picture of Dorian Gray, and we just went through all 11, and I talked about them, and from that 3.5 hour talking spree, Kino Lorber very skillfully lifted a few good comments and edited together a nice 5 or 6 minute introduction for each of those 11 Dan Curtis productions. But there still are quite a few that
Nice.
I hope Kino Lorber will release, such as the Norliss tapes, Scream of the Wolf, um, Curse of the Black Widow, even The Great Ice ripoff, not a horror film, but a heist mystery comedy drama.
Mm. Jeff, let's go back to being in Louisville and you get to accept the award. If you've got that award, by the way, and you can hold it up, feel free to do so. If it's behind glass, that's fine too. I'm curious, do you make remarks when you accept the award, or is it just basically a visual type of ceremony?
No, people, if they are there in person, can give a short speech, or like I say, others sent a little video. Yes, just as I sat down just before we began, I realized, well, I should have taken it off the wall and held it. But it's a nice wooden plaque with the face of Rondo Hatton coming out of it. Um, but sorry that I don't have it. But it's in another room, hanging on the wall. But we'll maybe we can see it some other time. Um,
Yeah.
Yes, I kept my speech brief, just 6 sentences, and said that, I am a father, grandfather, uncle, great uncle, teacher, speaker, writer, but before I was any of those things, I was a monster kid.
Mm.
I forget exactly what I said, but I said, I grew up reading books and comic books, watching monster movies, Batman and Dark Shadows, going trick-or-treating, building monster models, drawing, writing, immersing myself in fandom. And from those roots of my being a monster kid, I shaped that into my life's work, teaching English at Tennessee State University and Nashville State Community College, always infusing my English classes with popular culture and science fiction,
Mhm.
fantasy, and horror, and writing my 3 books about producer director Dan Curtis, and numerous articles and book introductions or book chapters, and now appearing at conventions and speaking on podcasts like Ghostly Gallery and Terror at Collinwood. So I thanked everybody immensely, because it's been a long time dream of mine to be inducted into the Monster Hall of Fame. So I said, thank you for making my dream a reality.
Yeah. At the ceremony, I imagine you talked to your good friend Larry Underwood. Larry was on recently to talk about his terrific new book about Nashville horror hosting. What did Larry have to say to you?
Oh,
There you go.
Larry and his son Luke were there. They had a table, and of course, Larry was dressed as Dr. Gangrene, and so yeah, I was happy to visit with him. And his book is selling very well, and I'm thrilled because I wrote the foreword to the book,
Hmm.
and I'm
Yep.
very pleased with that foreword. And um, Larry is not the first Nashville horror host. As you will see when you read the book, there were many others: The Count of Five, Sir Cecil Creep, and the very first Nashville horror host, Dr. Lucifer, spelled
Yeah.
with a U at the end, Lucifer, as in fur, not the devil. And I knew Dr. Lucifer. He was the late broadcaster Ken Bramming.
Mm,
He and I worked together for many years at WAMB Radio, years after he had been Dr. Lucifer on two different TV stations. Um, he's a little before my time, so I really did not see him as Dr. Lucifer. I grew up with Sir Cecil Creep and others, but I interviewed Ken Bramming one day when we were sitting at the station and wrote a little article for Film Facts magazine. So I was thrilled to be able to write that forward and write some of my memories about Ken Bramming as Dr. Lucifer and about the 2 or 3 times that I met Russ McCown, who played Sir Cecil Creep on local
mhm.
Nashville television, and then came back a decade later on the Nashville Network, the national cable channel, playing essentially the same character, but now he is called the Phantom of the Opry.
Right. Any people that you met for the first time at the ceremony that you got a chance to talk to?
Oh, quite a few Facebook friends whom I had never met in person until now, like Sam Irvin and Mark Maddox and Tom Stockton and David Colton and quite a few others. I can't,
Yeah.
Anthony Taylor, I've met him in person one time, and I'll be seeing him at Monsterama in
Yeah.
Atlanta in August. So, yeah, I wasn't there too long. I didn't spend the night or anything. I just drove up Saturday morning and had a few hours to walk around and then attended the 4 o'clock Eastern time award ceremony and then drove back home. And I got here at 8 p.m. Central Time just as the sun was setting. So it was a
Yeah.
nice trip, but very short. So I wish that I could have met even more people.
Tell us about meeting Sam Irvin. He's quite a guy.
Oh, yes. Yeah, he has won Rondo Awards for, books that he has written about Frankenstein, the True Story, and others, and, he's a filmmaker. He just finished making a vampire movie with Barbara Crampton, who
Yeah.
won a Rondo Award also, and the 2 of them, got the news back on May 10th when they were on their set filming a scene. So yeah, Sam is a writer and speaker and filmmaker and is very, very accomplished. So I was happy to meet him in person, and I'll be seeing him again at Monsterama in Atlanta, August 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see his vampire movie. He's done horror movies in the past, but this is really the first time he's ventured into this supernatural world of the undead. Did he tell you much about the movie?
No, we talked about filmmaking in general as we stood around with some people at the end of the award ceremony, but no, we didn't go into detail about his movie other than he mentioned Barbara Crampton to me, and of course I've seen her horror movies, and I remarked to him that I also watched her on Days of Our Lives and The Young and the Restless.
Yeah. You've had a very successful career, obviously. You have a doctorate. You've been a professor in college for many years. You've written excellent books on Dan Curtis, both in terms of his horror productions, but also other areas that he's ventured into. So you've got all these accomplishments, and now you get this honor. Where does this rate, this being named to the Monster Kid Hall of Fame, where does that rate for you on your list of achievements?
Oh, very high. Um, you know, some of my most rewarding experiences have been moving here to this new house, which then was superseded by the best thing that ever happened to me, being a father to my son Jonathan, and now a grandfather to his son Jackson, and being an uncle and a great uncle, and
Mm,
a caregiver for the family dog Sadie, and of course, my work as a teacher, 35 years at Tennessee State University, and then I came back for one more year and several years part-time at Nashville State Community College and Watkins College of Art, Design, and Film. And 28 of those 35 years when I was at TSU, I also was doing WAMB radio on the weekend. I was a weekend announcer
oh,
for WAMB and did all kinds of special programs about Oscar-winning songs and great composers, songwriters, movie music, TV music, always, some Halloween and horror themed um, programs around October. And at WAMB, we played the Orson Welles War of the Worlds every year with some pre-recorded
Oh, really?
intros and outros by Ken Branning as Dr. Lucifer. So,
Yeah.
yeah, my writing, of course, my teaching, all of my family and friends, and so those are at the top, right along with the great Rondo Award, Monster Kid Hall of Fame. I was just on the night of Mother's Day, May 10th. I was sitting here and I learned that I had won, and I yelled out and started writing to people, and I said, "Is it true? Did I really win? I'm not
Yeah.
sure," but people said, "Yes, you did." So, and then later that night, after hearing from people like Anthony Taylor and Ansel Farage and others, then David Colton himself wrote to me and said, I guess you know by now that you are one of the inductees. And I said, oh, yes, this means everything to me.
Yeah.
I'm so happy.
It's great that he follows up with an email. That's terrific. Let's
Oh,
talk, Jeff,
very
about your journey and how you got here as first a fan of horror and then a historian, someone who's involved in writing both articles and books. You worked on documentaries. You talked about that. Did all of this begin with Dark Shadows? Because that's what you're particularly known for, your expertise there. Or did it start with some other film, some other horror production? Where did this begin for you?
I was watching The Munsters, a couple of years, actually 3 years before I started watching Dark Shadows late. I didn't see the first year. I found Dark Shadows one day on my TV set when I was homesick from school in September of 1967. So Barnabas Collins was already in the story, and Dark Shadows was becoming Dark Shadows. Um, but I loved the Munsters, the Addams Family, Captain Nice, Mr. Terrific, all of the genre uh, TV shows from that time. And then, of course, Dark Shadows, Star Trek, Mission Impossible, It Takes a Thief, all of those. And in Nashville back then, Channel 5, which is the CBS affiliate, uh, showed a movie at 4 o'clock every afternoon called The Big Show. And, we Nashvillians immediately smile when we hear about The Big Show, because that was a big influence, because that's where I saw a lot of these Universal monster movies and sci-fi movies. And, you know, just about every day it was some sort of monster or scary or supernatural or something very strange, like Arch Oboler's movie 5. So that really turned all of us Nashville kids into fanboys and fangirls. Um, and of course, I was reading comic books this whole time, and voraciously reading all kinds of children's books and young adult books and adult novels and things, especially when Dan Ross, my friend Dan Ross, began writing the Dark Shadows novels. Um, and then after Dark Shadows ended, I of course continued celebrating the show by reading the Dark Shadows comic books produced by Gold Key, which ran about 4 years after the show ended, and collecting all of the memorabilia, reading all of Dan Ross's Dark Shadows novels, and then going ahead and reading many of his Gothic novels, his other Gothic novels and historical novels. Later, I wrote my master's thesis about Dan Ross. And then in the mid 70s, when I was a teenager, I began writing for some Dark Shadows fanzines. Kathy Resch's gold standard Dark Shadows fanzine, The World of Dark Shadows, and then others such as Shadows of the Night, the Collinsport Call, the Parallel Times, about 2 dozen of them, I think. I would write articles, occasionally fiction, but my strength is nonfiction. And so I would write about the TV show or about the comic books. I've been studying the comic books, since I was, well, reading them since I was a little kid, but really studying them and analyzing them since I was 20 years old. So I was writing for the Dark Shadows fanzines, and that continued all through the 1980s and into the early 90s. But by this time, I was beginning to write some articles for magazines, an interview with Laura Parker for Femme Fatales magazine, and a review of Jeffrey Arsenault's vampire film Night Owl for Cinefantastique. And that 33-year-old movie is going to be screened in Dallas, Texas, later this summer. And many articles for some great magazines, uh, Movie Club, Mad About Movies, Midnight Marquee, and Scarlet Street. And from there, Midnight Marquee is the name of the magazine, as well as the name of a publishing company, Midnight Marquee Press, run by Sue and Gary Stila up in Maryland. And they, of course, publish books. They've done books about all of our horror stars. And so I started having some book chapters published in some of those books. I have a chapter in the book, the Peter Lorre book. I write about the wonderful Kay Kaiser movie, You'll Find Out, which is the only film ever to have Lugosi, Karloff, and Lorre in the same film. Many movies have two of those, but that's the only movie, You'll Find Out, 1940, that has all three of those horror stars. And I wrote another one for another one called You're Next, Loss of Identity in Horror Films. And I wrote several chapters about Dan Curtis's movies, mostly Night of Dark Shadows, Burnt Offerings, and a few others. And so I was beginning to make inroads into contributing to multi-author books, and later I wrote one for Syracuse University Press, a chapter about Dark Shadows in a book called Television Finales, a big, thick book of which has chapters about the last episode of almost any TV show you can think of. And then I was very fortunate to write the introductions to 8 books by Hermes Press, reprinting the Gold Key Dark Shadows comic books, and one reprinting the one-shot Gold Key Dark Shadows Story Digest magazine, and one book reprinting the wonderful Dark Shadows newspaper comic strip, which ran in some papers across the country in 71 and 72, most of that time after the TV show had ended. So I was starting to write for those outlets and things, and then in 2006, I told you I had written my master's thesis at TSU about Canadian author Dan Ross, who wrote the Dark Shadows novels. But now I was studying for my PhD, doctor's degree in English, at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 45 or 50 minutes away. And I was trying to figure out what I should write about it, and I was deciding to write about film noir in general, or maybe the film Chinatown in particular. When Dan Curtis died, he died in March of 2006. And so a wonderful weekly online e-zine newsletter journal called Scoop wrote to me and said, "Will you write Dan Curtis's obituary for us?" And we put out Scoop every week, and we'd like to add him. And so I did, and wrote the obituary essentially off the top of my head, because by this time I had written about Curtis and all of his productions, for fanzines or book chapters and things like that. And so I realized, well, there are countless books about film noir and Chinatown and that genre, but there is not enough documentation about Dan Curtis. He has died, and he needs to be recognized. Everybody is aware of his work because all of us have seen Trilogy of Terror, The Night Stalker, Burnt Offerings, The Winds of War, but many people may not know the name Dan Curtis. So I said, well, that's what I need to write my doctoral dissertation about, his horror productions, and shine a spotlight on Dan Curtis and his accomplishments. And so that's what I did. And I got the PhD in 2007 and then submitted my dissertation to McFarland, the North Carolina-based publisher of books about popular culture. And so McFarland really liked it and wanted to publish it. And luckily, it was exactly the right length that they wanted. So I really didn't have to do much. I just, added some things in the introduction and took a few things away and tweaked a few things. But luckily, it was almost ready to go. So my book, The Television Horrors of Dan Curtis, which began as my dissertation, morphed into the first book for McFarland. And since then, what I just showed you is the revised second edition, which is much better. It's
Yeah.
more up to date. It includes some of the things that have happened more recently. And but my friend Jim Pearson, who works with Dan Curtis Productions and MPI Home Video and shares the Dark Shadows Festival, shared quite a few pictures with me, photographs of Curtis's productions, far more than what I could put into this first book. And most of these were rare pictures that I had never seen before, and I'm sure most of the fans had never seen. So, because I wanted to show the fans more pictures, that was one of my inspirations for going ahead and writing the second book, House of Dan Curtis, a play on the name of the movie House of Dark Shadows. But I'm talking about the productions that come from the production house of Dan Curtis, essentially his mysteries and crime dramas. All three of my books cover all 4 dozen of Curtis's productions, but each book has a little bit of a different focus and spotlight. But House of Dan Curtis zooms in on the mysteries and crime dramas, many of which I introduced to on the Kino Lorber Blu-rays. And so then a fan told me, well, if you wrote House of Dan Curtis, you're going to have to write Night of Dan Curtis, because the next Dark Shadows movie was Night of Dark Shadows. And so I decided, well, I'll write Nights, plural, of Dan Curtis about
Yeah.
his great epics, Dracula, The Last Ride of the Dalton Gang, The Winds of War, War and Remembrance, and his UFO miniseries, Intruders, because we spent many nights sitting in front of our TV sets watching those miniseries and those epic productions of Dracula and his Western and the UFOs and things like that. So that's how I was able to use almost all of the pictures that Jim Pearson had shared with me, and I was able to write about every single one of Curtis's 4 dozen productions, and I've seen every one of them except for some of the episodes of Super Train, the TV series that he helped start and then left after a few episodes. And of course, all of his golf shows. Before he did Dark Shadows, he was a golf producer and was still producing golf shows all the time Dark Shadows was on. So
Really?
he would be doing a golf show on Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and then overseeing Dark Shadows Monday through Friday. But of course, a
Wow.
lot of those are lost. They were live and were not saved. But there are some films that still exist of some of the challenge golf and some of his golf series. But of all of
Yeah.
his scripted fictional works, I've seen all of his Unsold Pilots and all of the others, and have a long list of them in the books, and of course write about them.
I'd always been a fan of Dan Curtis. I'd enjoyed many of the films, House of Dark Shadows and Burnt Offerings in particular. And then I read your books, and I remember we started communicating. It might have been through Facebook. We had emails going back and forth. I think you were generous enough to send me some free copies, which I really appreciated. I read all the books. After reading all the books that you did on Dan Curtis, he became my favorite horror director of all time. I think prior Hitchcock was probably number one, but now Hitchcock is number two because Curtis did such a large volume and really quality work as well. It wasn't just the number of productions, TV and film, but it was the quality as well. And such an underrated director, never really got his full due. And after I read your books, that really convinced me, this guy was phenomenal and he has become my favorite director. I want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago. I think you mentioned that you interviewed Lara Parker. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. It was
Tell me about
1990.
that.
Yeah, it was 1994, a night in June, and I called her on the phone, and we talked for quite a while. The focus of that article was not as much Dark Shadows, although we talked a great deal about it, but it was her movie appearances. Um, Night of Dark Shadows, Save the Tiger, the great Jack Lemmon movie, and Foxfire Light, and several other films that she did. And
Race with the
so
Devil, was that one of them?
oh, yeah, yes, Race with the Devil, yeah, one of the
Yeah,
the best, scary movies of the '70s, yes, she talked a
yeah.
great deal about Race with the Devil and filming with the snakes and all of that, so, yeah, there were quite a few movies, about 6, that she appeared in, and one that never came out, and she, said she just shot a couple of scenes in Central Park for that, and then nothing came of it, and who knows where that footage is. Oh, she also did one for, Brian De Palma, Hi Mom. Um,
Hmm.
so yes, so she did work in film before she began teaching school herself and writing her novels. She's written several Dark Shadows based novels, and then in the last few decades of her life, she was teaching high school and college English. So the last few times that I ran
Really?
into her at a convention and one time at a birthday party, we we spent most of our time talking about teaching and what we were doing with our students and what grammar exercises and what poems we were using. It was not as much Dark Shadows, but it was just talking about what we were doing with our students. So yeah, that was very enjoyable, and you can find uh, essentially that article, although I have changed it and updated it and added to it, but essentially the the basis of that article now is on a website called lauraparkerinfo.com.
Hmm.
And you can look around and find a space that says interviews and click on that. And you'll see the text of the interview. But I, of course, have updated it to the 2020s because now Laura Parker has passed away. And the very last thing she did was a film for Ansel Farage called The Great Nick D, which included
Yes.
several other Dark Shadows stars, Laura Parker, I mean Catherine Lee Scott, and others.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I brought it up to the present time by mentioning that and mentioning her memorial service and things like that. So yes, Laura Parker was wonderful, and she was a Tennessean. She was born over in East Tennessee around Knoxville, and grew up in West Tennessee, Memphis.
Hmm.
It was always nice when I got to talk with her.
Yeah. What was her personality like?
Oh, uh, very regal and majestic, but also very accessible, very friendly, and talkative. Once you got her talking about something she was interested in, like writing or teaching or movies, so she was a delightful person, and
Yeah.
um, had a lifelong friendship with Catherine Lee Scott and a few other Dark Shadows performers, and so yeah, she Dark Shadows would not have been the same, obviously, without Angelique and her other characters.
And she must have liked you because you had the teaching background as well. You had something in common there.
Yes, uh-huh. Yeah, so that
Yeah.
was nice for us to talk about when we ran into each other.
I'm curious about any of the other Dark Shadows actors and actresses that you've met. Any experiences that have been particularly memorable for you?
Oh, yes, I really enjoyed meeting Jonathan Frid in the mid-1980s, a group of fans and I, uh, had the wonderful opportunity to go to his apartment in Manhattan and,
Wow.
have to a little reception, and, he would, um, practice and develop his one-man shows of dramatic readings and
Hmm.
try them out on small groups of fans. He in the last years of his life, he went around and um, spoke at other conventions, not sci-fi necessarily, although he did go to the Atlanta Fantasy Fair, but just, you know, any type of business convention, and he was the entertainment. He did the one-man show of dramatic readings, and he did it on cruise ships and, all sorts of places. He also, was on Broadway in Arsenic and Old Lace, playing, the part that, Boris Karloff, I think, played on Broadway
Hmm.
years ago, and then Raymond Massey played it in the movie. And then later he took that on tour. He was with um, Marion Ross and Jean Stapleton as the sisters, and Gary Sandy of WKRP in Cincinnati as
Hmm.
the male lead, and Larry Storch as Jonathan Frid's sidekick in the play. And so it didn't come to Nashville, unfortunately, but it came to Louisville, Kentucky,
Yeah.
in January of 1987. So my family and I drove up uh, to see his show. But I saw many of his one man shows at the Dark Shadows festivals. Jonathan Frid's Fools and Fiends is one, and another one was called Genesis of Evil. And another, a funny one, was called Jonathan Frid's Fridiculousness. Put that NESS on the end of that word long before that MTV show did, and several all in that vein. He read from Shakespeare and read a fabulous version of The Telltale Heart that inspired me to begin reading it aloud to my students. And he read a story by William F. Nolan, and one by Stephen King, and some poetry by Eve Merriam and Ogden Nash, things like Irwin Shaw, a short story by him. So it was wonderful whenever I got to see Jonathan Frid when he was active in the conventions in the 80s and early 90s. And
Yeah.
then he kind of stepped away from the conventions and worked on his website and on his live theater for a few years, and that coincidentally coincided with a time when I wasn't able to go to the conventions because of time and money and school. But then he then came back around the time I started going back to a few of them in the late 2000s and 2010. So it was nice to see him again. He both of us had were a lot older. He had gotten older, and so had I. But it was nice to talk briefly with him again. Oh,
How did
and
it come to pass, Jeff, that he invited you and your friends to his apartment? How'd that come about?
oh, uh, I I'm I can't remember the details of it, but I just was lucky enough to know some friends who were friends of his,
Yeah.
and I was able to go along to one of his little gatherings at his apartment, like a night before, a day or a night or two before the Dark Shadows convention itself. That's why I was up there in New York and
Right.
was able to
Yeah.
see it. But he met with the New York area fans more often than that. Um, and then Catherine Lee Scott she is the true ambassador of Dark Shadows. She has kept Dark Shadows alive all these
Yeah.
years, and of course has written countless books about Dark Shadows and done interviews and everything. And it's always fun to see her. I ran into both her and Laura at a party in Atlanta, Georgia, in 2012. But in 2010, Catherine was a guest at a Nashville comics and sci-fi convention. There's a guy named Mark Ballard who puts on comics and sci-fi conventions in all around Middle Tennessee, and he has brought in people like John Saxon and Cindy Morgan and several. I can't think of some of the others, but one year, 2010, Catherine Lee Scott was his classic guest, and so I picked her up, her and her husband, at the airport, and drove them to their hotel, and had dinner with them, and drove them the next morning from the hotel to the convention and back again. And so it was nice to spend some time with Catherine and her husband at the time, Jeff, who had a terminal illness and has now passed away. And Catherine has written two very poignant, touching books about their relationship and the time leading up to everything. And but now that was years ago, and now Catherine is happily married to a man named Patrick, and she often shows pictures of their travels and their parties and dinners and things on her Facebook page. And so it was fun to meet so many of the stars, albeit briefly, at the conventions. David Selby, John Carlin, all of them very, very nice. James Storm, really nice. And I've mentioned Monsterama, the convention in Atlanta on August 7th, 8th, and 9th. And it's going to be essentially a small Dark Shadows gathering, because Monsterama will celebrate the 60th anniversary of Dark Shadows, as well as the 100th birthday of the great writer Richard Matheson. I Am Legend, The Incredible Shrinking Man, Somewhere in Time. And of course, Dan Curtis and Richard Matheson were friends and collaborators. Matheson wrote 6 produced scripts for him and was working on several others, including a Western and others that never were produced, but they were lifelong friends. So that will be like catnip for me to go down and talk about Dan Curtis and Richard Matheson. So I'm going to be one of the guests at Monsterama, as well as Penny Dreadful, your fellow podcaster. You've listened to her great podcast, Terror at Collinwood. And then at least 3 of the Dark Shadow stars will be there: Catherine Lee Scott and James Storm, not only from Dark Shadows, but also from The Young and the Restless and The Bold and the Beautiful. And Sharon Smith Lentz, who is essentially my age because she was a little kid on Dark Shadows. She played the ghost of Sarah Collins in 1967, and then when the show went back in time to 1795, she was alive as Sarah Collins when we saw the circumstances of how her big brother, Barnabas Collins, became one of the living dead. So Monsterama is something to look forward to. It's happening just one weekend after the Dark Shadows Festival itself in Los Angeles, which is July 31st and August 1st and 2nd at, I think, the Marriott right there at the Los Angeles airport. And there will be more than 15 of the Dark Shadows stars there at that convention. Jerry Lacey and Roy Finnis of The Invaders and the 1991 Dark Shadows, and Joanna Going of the 1991 Dark Shadows. And many stars of the original show: Marie Wallace, Catherine Lee Scott, David Selby. So that should really be a great convention. And there will be some books and merchandise, books, records, CDs, things like that for sale, and some special presentations and some surprises, I understand, and a bus trip over Greystone Mansion in Beverly Hills, which you've seen on many TV shows and in many movies, but you know it as Collinwood in the 1991 Dark Shadows. So that will be fun. I was lucky enough to be in Los Angeles in the summer of 1990 when the Dark Shadows 91 series was being filmed, and Jim Pearson took me over to Greystone Mansion. On that day, they were not filming there. They were filming at a soundstage, and no one was allowed to go in there. But he took me over to Greystone, and the set of the mausoleum where Willie opens the chain coffin was set up in the parking lot at Greystone, just out in the outdoors. It was set up.
Wow.
But of course, the way the camera closes in, you have no idea that you're outside. And then down the hill in the front yard of the estate was the Collinsport Cemetery, Eagle Hill Cemetery, the gravestones and the fake entrance to the mausoleum where all you could do is walk into it, and then the camera would cut to this other set of the mausoleum. So I was delighted to be able to see that back in the summer of 1990 before the show itself ran in January, February, and March of 1991.
Yeah. Let's go back to Jonathan Frid for a moment. You know, it's interesting. After Dark Shadows, and while Dark Shadows was on, he made The House of Dark Shadows, terrific film. And then after Dark Shadows came to an end on television, he did a couple of other horror movies. One was a very strange movie called Seizure. And then there was another one, I think, with Shelley Winters, Daughter of Darkness, something like that.
No, The Devil's Daughter.
Devil's Daughter. That's right. Devil's Daughter.
Who directed
Now, he only did those few productions, really, in terms of movies. And I'd always wondered why he didn't do more. And then I'd read that he really was a lover of doing theater. Live theater was the big thing. Did he talk about that at all? His desire to do theater and maybe his preference for doing theater over film and TV?
Oh, yes. He was a Shakespearean actor. That's why his portrayal of Barnabas Collins is so intense and tragic, because he had that great Shakespearean training. And he had played Caliban and he had played Richard III. And he said in later years he would love to have played Richard again. But yes, he loved theater. He as soon as Dark Shadows ended, or maybe a week or so before it ended, he was doing Murder at the Cathedral. And while Dark Shadows was on, he slipped away and did Dial M for Murder for a couple of weeks. And then later in his life, he appeared in the play Mass Appeal. You may remember that movie with Jack Lemmon. That's the part Jonathan Frid played. So Jonathan was always acting on stage before and even during and after Dark Shadows, and Arsenic and Old Lace, of course. So yes, that was his preference. He didn't really like horror. He didn't see the appeal of it, and frankly didn't understand why all of us fans were so wild about him and Barnabas and Dark Shadows, because he was more interested in stagecraft and acting on stage and theater. But he did do an ABC movie of the week called The Devil's Daughter, directed by Jeannot Swark, who directed Somewhere in Time. And it starred Shelley Winters and Belinda J. Montgomery and Joseph Cotton. It has been out on DVD in the past, and you might be able to find it, but it's definitely worth watching. What ABC movie of the week is not? I love the ABC movie of the week, because almost every week was some sort of suspense, supernatural, occult thing like The Devil's Daughter. And Jonathan played Shelley Winters' butler, Mr. Howard, who did not speak. He was not able to speak. So it was a tour de force for Jonathan's body language and his facial expressions and his eyes. So that was interesting to see him do that. And then you're right, he did do Seizure, which was Oliver Stone's first movie. It was directed by Oliver Stone. And a lot of really good co-stars in that. Martine Beswick from James Bond and Hammer and horror films, and then a lot of good New York stage actors, some of whom I'd seen on soap operas or heard their voices on the CBS Radio Mystery Theater. The movie is good, but not great. And It's definitely worth seeing once or several times just to see Jonathan's performance, because it's a very different acting job than Barnabas or Bramwell or anything you've seen him do in the past. It's a great idea that could have been executed much better, but it's definitely worth seeing. And For all of those great stars, and for Jonathan, who is the movie, the movie centers around him, and it's from his point of
Yeah.
view mostly. But then after that, he went down to South America to help promote Dark Shadows when it was translated into Spanish and shown all over South America in the 1970s, and became a huge hit all over again. He was mobbed by fans down there when he went down there, the way he was here in the U.S. When Dark Shadows was on ABC. But after that, he just didn't seem to have the desire to continue in movies and TV. So that's when he started continued theater, and then started his own
Yeah.
one-man shows.
I was never fortunate enough to meet him, but I have heard from just about everybody who did that he was one of the nicest gentlemen in Hollywood. And
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sure you agree with that assessment.
Yes, very kind, genteel, refined, well-mannered, he did not suffer fools, but he was very kind and patient with the fans, and a great conversationalist. So
Yeah.
he really was a great treasure, and helped keep Dark Shadows on the air, for years.
I want to talk a little bit about the revival series that you mentioned a few moments ago. It came out in the early 1990s. It was an NBC show. I thought it was terrific. It was very well done. It had
Mhm.
high production values. Ben Cross played Barnabas instead, of course, of Jonathan Frid. But it was really hurt by an irregular schedule. There were wars going. There was a war going on at the time, and there
For
was a lot of interruption in the airings, the regular airings of Dark Shadows, because of news reports. The news preempted a number of the shows, and that really kind of hurt the program's following. I'm curious, Jeff, what did you think of that one season of Dark Shadows as a revival series?
I loved it, and I love it even more every time I rewatch it. Um, it, it's authentic Dark Shadows, because Dan Curtis was at the helm and directed some of the episodes, and Sam Hall, who wrote Dark Shadows and the Dark Shadows movies, uh, was one of the writers, along with
Yeah.
two women who wrote Beauty and the Beast, and Sam Hall's son Matthew Hall, and other directors like Armand Mastroianni. And So it was just a wonderful production, fabulous. Ben Cross was very, very good as Barnabas. Horror icon Barbara Steele, a personal friend of Dan
Yes.
Curtis's and a co-producer on The Winds of War and other projects, was excellent as Dr. Julia Hoffman. And Joanna Going was absolutely perfect as Victoria
Mhm.
Winter and Josette
Yeah.
Dupre. And of course, it was on film instead of videotape, and Curtis and the others had more time, to perfect it. And of course, Greystone Mansion was gorgeous. Robert Cobert came back to do the music.
Mhm.
If Robert Cobert doesn't do the music, it's not Dark Shadows, because
Right.
like other TV shows like Downton Abbey and The Odd Couple and Twin Peaks, Batman, when you hear that music, you're watching Dark Shadows, or you're watching that show or this show. Um, and Dan Curtis himself said, I'm making the show, I'm remaking Dark Shadows the way the fans and I wanted it to be back then, meaning bigger budget, special
Mhm.
effects, more grandeur. And what I loved about it was so tragic and emotional.
Mhm.
I really liked it, and wish that it should have run. much longer than it did because by then, most of the nighttime serials, Dallas, Falcon Crest, Dynasty, were off the air, although Knots Landing was still on. But people still were interested in continuing stories, and certainly are today because almost every nighttime show is a continuing story. You have to see every episode. So
Right.
it really should have run, 4 or 5 years or longer. But what we got, of course, was terrific, and so I'm glad that we have those 13 hours, 12 episodes. Um, but yes, you're right. In January, Dark Shadows had a big splashy debut on NBC as a 2-night miniseries,
Hmm.
2 hours on Sunday night and 2 hours on Monday night before it went to its Friday night time slot, regular time slot. But between the Monday night and the Friday night, that's when the Persian Gulf War broke out. And
Right.
so people's people's minds were not on TV shows at that time. People were concerned about that and wanted to watch news coverage about that. And so that was terrible timing. And then for some reason, the show was preempted once in March to show The Empire Strikes Back of all things, So,
Hmm.
but other than that, it did run every Friday night except for that one time, and then for some interruptions and things as well. But oh, it was certainly a delight to tune in every Friday night and watch those episodes. But unfortunately, it lost its momentum and it lost its significance and its prominence
Yeah.
in on TV and in our minds, in the viewers' minds, because real life tragedies began, during its run.
You mentioned some of the great individual performances. Joanna Going is beautiful in the series. Barbara Steele does her usual stuff. You talk about Roy Thinnis was in it as well. I'll tell you though, Ben Cross, he had extremely difficult shoes to fill trying to take over what Jonathan Frid had done. And rather than give us an imitation of Jonathan Frid as Barnabas Collins, he made it his own, and I thought he was extremely effective with it.
Absolutely. He had more of an edge to his Barnabas than Jonathan
Yes.
Frid did, although he was not the out and out villain that Barnabas was in House of Dark Shadows. Dan Curtis's word he
Right.
used was marauder, which was his original concept of the TV character, because he thought that the vampire would be on for only 3 weeks and then they'd drive a stake through his heart. That he didn't realize that Barnabas and Frid would become so important to the show. But yes, Ben Cross played it in a different way. He still was sympathetic. One of his lines was, "I cannot help myself." But then he
Yeah.
also had a harder edge. You could believe that he could be tender with Victoria one minute and then strangle somebody or bite somebody the next. So yes, he was very charismatic in the role, both as the present time Barnabas released from the coffin, and then when we saw him in 1790 was the year in that show, not 1795, and all of the costumes, were beautiful. Some of them, I believe, had been used in movies like Dangerous Liaison and
Hmm.
things like that. But the costumes were great. Greystone Mansion looks great. Robert Cobert's music was wonderful. He used some of his original melodies, the TV theme song, of course, and Josette's Music Box, and some of the other themes from the TV show. But then he also gave us some new compositions and used synthesizers and really brought it up to the present day of the 90s as opposed to the 60s. So
Right.
so I really liked it. I really liked it.
I wanted to ask you one last question, and it's about Dark Shadows and potentially the future of this franchise. Jeff, would you like to see another adaptation of Dark Shadows, or do you think the franchise has reached the point where it should just be left to rest?
Oh no, Dark Shadows, like Star Trek and Doctor Who and every cult classic TV show and movie and great book and great comic book should live forever. And I think it will. We're still reading and performing Shakespeare. And we're still reading Charles Dickens and Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson and everybody else, Anne Rice. So there's definitely a place for Dark Shadows, whether it is a TV show or a movie or novels or comic books or whatever. And there have been several recent attempts to get something going, maybe like a Dark Shadows The Next Generation type of thing, like Star Trek The Next Generation.
Yeah.
But so far, nothing has come to fruition, which is a shame because now, there are so many more TV channels, cable
Sure.
and streaming. And, every time you turn around, there's a different outlet where you can watch dramas and comedies. So I wish that something could happen, but who knows? Maybe we're going to hear some announcements at the Dark Shadows Festival in late July and early August. Or, something may be simmering and something may come yet. But I definitely hope that, and I know that Dark Shadows will continue because all of us fans will keep it alive. And then there are fans of all ages, not just people like me who ran home from school to watch the show, but like all great soap operas, all of the soap operas have stayed on for decades because grandmothers and mothers and children have all watched together. And so now, people in their 30s, 40s, 20s, college age, teenagers, little kids have discovered Dark Shadows on the Sci-Fi Channel or MeTV or the Old Decades Channel, or of course the VHS and DVDs. And so there are new fans coming along all the time, and so there will be no end to Dark Shadows. It's here to stay, just like Superman, Tarzan, Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, all of the great novels of literature, and everything that people know, as a household name.
Our guest has been Jeff Thompson, newly inducted member of the Monster Kids Hall of Fame. The books that he has written related to the career of Dan Curtis, there are 3 of them. There also have been revised editions of each. The Television Horrors of Dan Curtis, House of Dan Curtis, Night of Dan Curtis. And if you like Dark Shadows, if you like Curtis, and why wouldn't you, these are books you need to have. They're must-have reads. I've read them all. They're all excellent. And I believe they're all still in print. So we highly encourage you to purchase those. Jeff, we're really thrilled for you. It's very deserving that you have been elected to the Monster Kid Hall of Fame. It's a wonderful recognition. I'd like to say that I knew you when you were a little tyke, before you were famous, but I've only gotten to know you the last couple of years after you already were successful and famous, and now you're even more famous because of your election to the Rondo Monster Kid Hall of Fame. It's a great honor. It's well-deserved. Our sincere congratulations, both from myself and from Tracy.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And I want to mention one more thing. There's a brand new issue of Wonder magazine out that has an interview with me about Dan Curtis's cult classic, The Norliss Tapes. You can go to Amazon and click and write Wonder Magazine 19. And the previous issue, Wonder Magazine 18, has a long, beautifully illustrated interview with me about all of Curtis's horror productions. So Wonder Magazine is a really great magazine for people who love nostalgia of all kinds. So issues 18 and 19 are relevant to Dark Shadows and Dan Curtis.
I just saw the Norliss Tapes last year for the first time and really thought it was good. It's a shame. It was a pilot. It's a shame it never was made into a TV show. I'm kind of surprised it didn't make it, but it was extremely well done. That was a very, very fine film. And it's too bad. Maybe that's something that they could revisit at some point. Jeff, again, our thanks. Congratulations to you. You're always welcome here at the Ghostly Gallery. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Bruce and Tracy. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope to talk with you again sometime soon.
Sounds good. We're going to take a short break. When I come back, we'll have this week's edition of our Monster Mailbag. We've got one of our fan letters and also a letter from the folks at the Monster Bash convention, which I'll be attending. So we'll take care of the monster mailbag in just a moment. Stay with us on the Ghostly Gallery podcast. We are back on the Ghostly Gallery podcast. Bruce Marcuson along with you. Tracy Asteria off microphone and off camera, but manning the controls as our executive producer. Again, our thanks to the new Hall of Famer, Jeff Thompson, great historian and writer, Dark Shadows expert, but really a lover of horror in general as well. It's time now to move on to this week's edition of the Monster Mailbag. Just a couple of quick letters to mention. First up, we've got another great letter from our friend Donnie down in Florida. So he wrote me earlier this week. He said, "Hi, Bruce. Just wanted to say how much I enjoyed listening to TJ Payne. Great talker, and his stories of working for Rob Reiner are fascinating. I'm sure he could write a book about his time with Rob and the people he came in contact with. I also checked out his Intercepts novel. TJ is another person who I knew almost nothing of, and after listening to the podcast, I've become a fan of his, right up there as one of my favorite podcasts. Best to you and your family, Donnie. Donnie, as always, we appreciate the great feedback." And then also, I have a letter here. This was not just sent to me, but this was sent to everybody who has registered for this year's Monster Bash convention, which takes place at the Marriott Pittsburgh North in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. Now, when this episode debuts, it'll be the day before the convention. The convention is June 12th through the 14th. And in this welcoming letter, the folks at Monster Bash, Ron Adams and company, have informed us of the lineup of guests coming up. So he writes, "Thanks for becoming a member of Monster Bash. Hundreds and hundreds of fans just like you will be traveling from around the world to the Monster Bash Classic Movie Conference and Film Festival, brought to you by Creepy Classics." Ron Adams goes on to mention the guest lineup. I'll mention a few of them. Sean Cassidy, who is the son of the late actor Ted Cassidy, who, of course, played Lurch on the original Addams Family. Also a guest at this year's Monster Bash, actress Beverly Washburn, known for the terrific film with Lon Chaney, Spider Baby. Butch Patrick, who, of course, was Eddie Munster from The Munsters. He is one of two surviving members of the regular cast, and he'll be appearing at this year's Monster Bash. Also looking forward to seeing actor Daniel Roebuck. We mentioned that Daniel has been named to the Rondo Kids Monster Hall of Fame, along with Jeff Thompson. Daniel Roebuck played Grandpa Munster in the Munsters remake from Rob Zombie. He has also played Dr. Shocker. Done some non-horror films and as well. The Fugitive, which is probably one of the top 10 films of all time. He did that. He was also on the Matlock Show with Andy Griffith, and he played the wonderful Rick Pitino on Nash Bridges. He's worked with some big-time names, Andy Griffith, Don Johnson, Harrison Ford, Tommy Lee Jones. So we look forward to seeing Daniel at this event. And let's see who else. David the Rock Nelson, he's quite a character. He'll be there. And then we've got historians and writers, Tom Weaver, Greg Menk, Frank Dell'Ostrito, and Lucy Chase Williams. Of course, Greg and Frank have been frequent guests on the program. We look forward to catching up with them as well. So thank you to Monster Bash for sending out the letter, even though it wasn't just sent to me, more of a form letter, but nice to hear after we officially registered for this year's conference, taking place June 12th, 13th, and 14th in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. Well, that's going to wrap things up for this week's edition of the Ghostly Gallery. We thank Jeff Thompson for being our guest. We, of course, thank Tracy for being our producer, behind-the-scenes person this week. We thank all of you for listening and watching. We do appreciate the fact that you have decided to spend some time in this Museum of the Macabre, and we hope we'll see you again next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.